Hey, how's it going guys? It's Nate here, and welcome yourselves back to the always fantastical world of Skyrim. A realm of mages, monsters, mythical gods, and malicious bandits. The Elder Scrolls V is indeed an enormous game, and such a massive universe is pretty much the perfect breeding ground for an assortment of various theories imagined and propped up by the community. From vampires being the true power behind Skyrim's throne, to the entire dragon crisis being the result of one silly guy's prayer, it seems almost every narrative in this game is up for questioning. So today, we'll be doing a bit of that, as we take a look at another 5 Skyrim theories that are crazy enough to possibly be true. Starting off, the Death of Raida and who her killer is may be one of Skyrim's most direct and difficult to answer mysteries. When we first arrive, the small town of Ivarstead in the Rift is going through a bit of turmoil. A few months ago, a young girl named Raida mysteriously disappeared. Her brother, a man named Narfi, seems to have been driven totally mad by the loss of his sister and only relative, and reverted to this childlike mental state. It's a pretty sad thing to watch. There's a short quest we can undertake to locate Raida's remains. Turns out her skeleton can be found in a nearby river, and return one of her lockets to Narfi to offer him some closure regarding the fate of his sister. But the game never tells us how she died, or who exactly murdered her to death. For years, the community has speculated that maybe Narfi himself killed her, and the reason he's so out of it now is due to internal grief. Others blame the particularly nosy innkeeper for the crime, but nothing has ever been confirmed by Bethesda. Well, some suspect that the killer may not even be a native of Ivarstead at all, and that Raida's real murderer is not only far away, but a vampire too. You see, the Dawnguard DLC introduced a character named Venaris Vulpin, an imperial vampire from the Somerset Isles, who recently came to Skyrim in search of a legendary underground well known as the Blood Spring. Venaris did find what he was looking for, and is using the Blood Spring for all sorts of nefarious activities now, so we have to kill him in Dawnguard. But importantly, Venaris has a number of journals lying throughout his lair that document the last few years of his life and his recent move to Skyrim. In them, he notes that just a few months ago, when he was still searching for the Blood Spring, he was at a tavern called the Vilemer Inn, quote-unquote, looking for some lunch when he got a lead. Now, the Vilemer Inn, for those of you that don't know, is the name of the tavern in Ivarstead. Venaris was there looking for somebody to eat right around the same time Raida went missing just a few months ago. Could it be that she was his unfortunate victim? Ivarstead is such a small community, you would think that if someone else disappeared so recently too, we would have heard something about it. So unless Venaris got a hold of Raida or found some random other traveler, then he just must not have fed during that period. Could it be that our true culprit behind this case never lived in Ivarstead to begin with, but is instead hiding dozens of feet below the earth, south of this location? Perhaps this devious undead has been an antagonist in our narrative long before we ever knew. Next on our list, let's talk about the Forsworn, a rebellious faction of people native to the Reach, who seek to make their homeland independent of not just the Empire, but independent of Skyrim too. And the Forsworn aren't above fighting dirty to achieve their goals either. Unlike the Stormcloaks, a similar band of rebels, the Forsworn make a point of terrorizing the innocent. Rather than battling with Imperial forces, they prefer to strike caravans, kidnap travelers, and operate from their various hidden camps and redoubts, where they clearly aren't demonstrating much respect for the Geneva Conventions. In this video, there's actually 2 different Forsworn-related conspiracies I want to discuss. But we'll start with what might be the more significant one. That they're actually all Daedra worshippers. Particularly following the evil Daedra. Or at least, a lot of the Forsworn are. So, before we get too deep into their religion, I do need to provide a bit of context on the Forsworn's history, as this will all become very relevant. You see, long ago, way back in the First Era, The Reach was indeed its own independent place, ruled by its own kings and lords, free of Skyrim or any other empire for that matter. This lasted up until around the year 430 of the First Era, around 3,500 years prior to the events of the Elder Scrolls V, when it was conquered by Skyrim's High King, Olaf One-Eye. After this conquest, while Skyrim's flags did fly in the area's cities, many of the Reach's people refused to accept Nordic rule, and fled into the mountains and hills of the region, where they established their own clans and tribes, and resisted their occupiers, behaving in a fashion very similar to the modern Forsworn, attacking innocents and whatnot. Eventually, towards the end of the Second Era, the Reachmen and their clans began to fizzle out. However, in the Fourth Era they re-emerged, now calling themselves the Forsworn. They briefly captured Markarth during the Great War, but once that ended, the Empire was able to take it back. And now they're back in the hills, and here we are. Okay, but with that established, what does this history lesson all have to do with their current pantheon, practiced by today's Forsworn? Well, I promise we'll get there. Bethesda doesn't confirm anything about the Forsworn religion in Skyrim. We know they're cool with necromancy, killing innocent people, and they don't seem to revere Talos all that much. So it seems unlikely they're followers of the common Elysian religion that most humans are. At the conclusion of the quest, No One Escapes Sidna Mine, if we side with the Forsworn, they will reward the player with a unique set of armor, known as the Armor of the Old Gods, implying that they may worship these old gods, whoever they are. Problem is, the game doesn't tell us who they are. But many suspect that those old gods are in fact the Daedra. The biggest piece of evidence for this is that in ESO we can find a book titled A Life Barbaric and Brutal, written by a Breton woman named Arthenice Belloc, who was captured by a tribe of Reachmen back in around 250 of the Second Era, when the Forsworn were still known as just the Reachmen. Arthenice was kidnapped by a tribe and forced into servitude for a few years as a child, and most of the book is dedicated to documenting that experience. And while doing so, she provides us with considerable insight regarding Reachmen's social organization and their pantheon. Evidently, the clan she was captured by was led not by a person, but by a Hag Raven, and they all worshipped Namira, Daedric goddess of decay and cannibalism. Allegedly, this group referred to Namira as the Child God, not because they thought of her as really young, but because every once in a while, they would sacrifice a child to her. Whoa. Note how calling her the Child God implies there are other gods they must acknowledge, but I digress. Little more is shared by this book, and not much else is said. However, it seems around 2,000 years ago at least, the Forsworn must have somewhat, to an extent, accepted the Daedric princes and worshipped them. I should also add that the human aspect of Hircine which appears in ESO has an armor type almost identical to that donned by Reachmen and the Forsworn. Could their dress be an homage or a tribute to him? One last major piece of potential evidence is the fact that the Reach is home to the largest number of Daedric shrines in the game. There's a shrine to Periite, Molag Bal, Hircine, and Namira. We don't know how any of these shrines at all were originally constructed, but it's possible that maybe the Forsworn erected them when they still had control of the region all those millennia ago. It seems these malevolent Daedra may be the only deities willing to tolerate some of the Forsworn's more devious activities anyway. At the end of the day, which gods these barbarians do and don't worship is something only they know. And unfortunately, they won't tell. Coming in at number 3, are the Knights of the Nine still out there? So, Skyrim players who haven't dabbled too much into the Elder Scrolls Oblivion and its DLCs may not immediately know what it is I'm referring to. The Knights of the Nine, short for the Knights of the Nine Divines, were a faction of warriors that the player could create and lead, or I suppose recreate and lead, it's a long story, that would help you in the main quest line of defeating an undead alien invasion. So, for those of you who are unaware, long ago, thousands upon thousands of years before even the Elder Scrolls IV, the region of Cyrodiil was controlled by an elven race known as the Ayleids. The Ayleids were not very good folks, though. They were known to have enslaved pretty much every human being they came across. Eventually, the humans got pretty annoyed by this, and they revolted. A number of prominent figures played a major part in this revolt, but the one the Knights of the Nine care about is a warrior named Pelinal Whitestrake. Pelinal led human armies in multiple battles, never suffering a defeat, and eventually he went on to personally duel and defeat the leader of the Ayleids in a one-on-one battle, and ultimately led to the freeing of all mankind. Well, now, thousands of years later, the ghost of that Ayleid leader is back, and he wants to reconquer what is his. The player will be able to found the Knights of the Nine, recover the very armor that was used by Pelinal Whitestrake, and defeat this Ayleid leader one final time, and once and for all, remove him from existence. Once you did that, the quest would be completed, and the Knights of the Nine faction you just started would sort of just continue to hang around for a while, always remaining vigilant of any new threats. And that was that. Those are the spark notes of the Knights of the Nine expansion, at least. However, following the conclusion of that questline, we're given absolutely no insight in what happened to the Knights of the Nine between the events of Oblivion and Skyrim. We don't know what's happened to them. Considering they are the Knights of the Nine, i.e. they worship Talos, and their entire existence is largely predicated upon dunking on elves who have a superiority complex, one would imagine that if they were still around when it eventually happened, they likely sided with the Empire during its Great War against the Thalmor. The Great War, of course, did not go very well for said empire, and the Blades, a similar Talos-worshipping elf-distrusting faction, was largely annihilated. So, it's unlikely the Thalmor would have tolerated the Knights' continued existence either. However, again, we actually have no idea what's happened to them. While the destruction of the Blades is recorded in numerous books, we hear about it in dialogue with other characters, nothing at all exists of the Knights of the Nine. No records. But some players believe that some of the original Knights might still be out there. There's really just one major piece of evidence which supports this notion, that its believers tend to cite. There does in fact seem to be what may be a dead Knight of the Nine we can find in Skyrim. Atop of a glacier nearby the Tower Stone in Winterhold, players can find the skeletal remains of a mysterious person holding up a flag, next to a chest with some random leveled loot, and a copy of the book, Knights of the Nine, which simply describes the history of the ancient order. Considering the flag and the book, many are of the opinion that this skeleton likely was a knight himself, possibly fleeing north following the events of the Great War, or the destruction of his group. Again, it's very unlikely the knights would have survived the Thalmor's peace conditions, but maybe they could have ended up like the Blades, and had a few scattered survivors. Whatever happened to these great crusaders, we may never know. We can only hope that if they did perish in the Great War, that they gave the elves one heck of a fight. For a fourth spot, after shouting, pretty much anywhere really, it's possible to receive a letter from a courier that will read something like this. Dear player character's name, you caused a bit of a stir in insert location when you demonstrated the power of your Thu'um. Not everyone is anxious for the return of the Dragonborn. I, for one, desire to see you grow and develop your talents. Skyrim needs a true hero these days. You should turn your attention to insert location here. I understand it holds a mysterious source of power that can only be unlocked by the Dragonborn. Sincerely, a friend. Reading this letter will then unlock the location of a dungeon containing a word wall on your character's map, allowing you to continue growing your Thu'um. Whoever this mysterious friend is, however, has always been the subject of much debate within the Elder Scrolls community. This person must possess some considerable knowledge about the player's whereabouts, regardless of where you are. I mean, you can get these letters if you shouted in Apocrypha. And they must really have an interest in seeing you develop your talents. With these conditions in mind, the community's developed countless possible explanations regarding who this friend might be. Some say it could be Delphine, Others allege it's the Ebony Warrior, who wants you to be as strong as possible for your impending battle. Some even suspect it's Hermaeus Mora, hoping you'll be capable of eventually defeating Miraak. But I've recently taken to liking one notion that puts the blame on the Greybeards, specifically Wulfgar, arguing that he's responsible for sending you these notes. Now, already we know that the Greybeards and their membership have the capacity to sense when the player shouts. And importantly, they also have a clear vested interest in seeing you grow stronger. They want you to defeat Alduin. And heck, even if you don't, they're still rooting for the Dragonborn. Well, the reason there's been a bit of a resurgence in suspicion that it's the Greybeards responsible is that it's been pointed out that one of their members, specifically Wulfgar, carries around a note and a quill in his inventory at all times. Wulfgar is one of the very few characters in the entire game who does this, and you would have to wonder, who exactly is he writing to? At first, it might be easy to assume, oh, he's probably writing to other Greybeards. You know, they don't like to use their voice very often. But even then, it seems they prefer to use this sort of non-direct communication. In multiple quests, it's almost like the Greybeards are reading each other's minds and just figuring out what the other ones want them to do. And besides, if they are passing notes to each other, why is Wulfgar the only one with a quill and paper? Okay, I'll admit this is probably the weakest of the theories in this video, and in all actuality, the friend is probably just Todd Howard or something, but still, something to consider. And finally, our last theory in this video, as promised, again concerns the Forsworn. Specifically, that their leader may not be who we think. So, throughout the No One Escapes Cidhna Mine questline, we're told that the Forsworn are led by a man named Madanak, the King in Rags. He's a prisoner currently being held at Cidhna Mine, who has allegedly, over the past few years, and despite being a prisoner, been able to pretty successfully organize his whole uprising, carefully smuggling out orders and directions to deliver to subordinates, and keeping this entire barbarian clan organized, all from the confines of a cell. It's pretty impressive. Ultimately, the player will get to choose between helping Madanak escape and flee into the hills, or killing Madanak and just escaping all by yourself, much to the satisfaction of the Reach's ruling elite. Whatever option you choose, though, there's good reason to suspect that the real power behind the Forsworn may not have ever been Madanak at all. You see, in certain Forsworn ruins and occupied forts, we can find letters referencing orders by a mysterious leadership-like figure, simply referred to as the Matriarch. At Serpent's Bluff, we can find a note in a Briarheart's tent that reads as follows, quote, "The Matriarch grows weary of your hesitation. Our people control the entire eastern slope of the Reach, all save Sunguard. Take it, and the invaders will be cut off from all retreat. But we must do it now, while its defenses are still weak. Summon the tribes, do what you must. But if you do not act, she will find someone who will." So, clearly assessing this note already, there's a very prominent figure amongst the Forsworn ranks, referred to as the Matriarch, that is clearly a woman and has a leadership-like position. There's another note we can find at Deepwood Redoubt under a dresser. This one conveys similar themes, reading, quote, "Matriarch, we await your orders. Our blades are honed, our quivers are full, our wills steeled for battle. The time of our waiting has ended. The time for battle is at hand. You have but to speak the word, and the occupiers shall fall like wheat before the reaper." So, yet again, this Matriarch character is referenced, and seems to be leading these people. There's no mention of Madanak or some king in rags. No, these notes are answering to this female character. Some of you may recall, around a year ago, I actually brought up this Matriarch character in a Mysteries video, though we really had no idea whatsoever who this fellow is. Thankfully, in the 365 plus days since then, Reddit has pieced together a good portion of this puzzle. You see, the Matriarch seems to be a Hag Raven held up at Hag's End. Hag's End, for those of you who are unfamiliar, can best be described as a Forsworn city, It is by far and away the largest camp or outpost the group currently possesses. Being based in an old Nordic ruin, there are dozens upon dozens of tents, and as we first approach, we'll find Forsworn agents engaging in settler-like activities, chopping wood, waiting for blood to drain on recent hunt kills. There will even be a few engaging in blacksmithing. This place kind of feels like the Forsworn capital. Even beyond that, getting to Hag's End alone is a bit of a hassle. You need to go through a specific dungeon called the Deepwood Vale, and to get to the Vale, you'll have to navigate through this area that's just teeming with more Forsworn. The point is, Hag's End is clearly an incredibly important place to the Forsworn. It is home to their largest concentration of soldiers, and by far and away, their largest camp. So, what exactly does this matriarch figure have to do with anything? Well, inside one of the tombs nearby Hag's End, we can find a note called the Forsworn Missive. It reads, quote, Alaric, do not presume we have grown fat and complacent here in the north. Our matriarch was wise to bring us here. Our camp is secure, our numbers grow. We will not skulk in the shadows with you, making petty plots with rabble and sycophants. When we strike, we will do it with cunning and power. The occupiers will fall before us. That is the way of true Reachmen. End quote. So this suggests that the reason the Forsworn are here at Hag's End was under the matriarch's orders. That matriarch figure ordered them to come here. Now, despite all of this dialogue and this clear correspondence, we never actually get a chance to see this matriarch character. Or do we? You see, if you head inside of Hag's End, within the first room, you'll find a Hag Raven standing alongside two witches. When you engage in battle, what will almost always end up happening is after you've defeated the two witches and have greatly wounded the Hag Raven, she'll mysteriously just disappear. Then later on, as you navigate further through the dungeon, you'll see this Hag Raven pop out of nowhere again, and you'll start battling her. You'll get her health really low, and she'll disappear again and reappear later on in the dungeon. This sort of cycle occurs 3 times, and it's an incredibly unique behavior for an unnamed NPC. She's a boss character with extremely high health, following programmed scripts and commands. Eventually, after we navigate throughout the entirety of Hag's End and get to the balcony of the ruin, we'll finally get a chance to defeat this Hag Raven once and for all. We'll be able to kill her without her disappearing this time. But considering this incredibly unique behavior for a character, the fact that all of the Forsworn seem to be committed to a lady named the Matriarch, who brought them over to this location, implying she's here too, and we know from history, Hag Ravens are capable of leading Forsworn tribes, it seems like this unnamed character might have been one of the most significant members of the Forsworn faction there is. And seemingly, its real leader. Sure, Madanak introduces himself to us as the leader of the Forsworn and the commander of all of their tribes, but when we actually go out into the real world, the Forsworn never reference him once. Maybe the title of King of the Forsworn is more symbolic than anything. Maybe it's the Matriarch who's supposed to be the real power behind everything, and the king is just sort of there. Wherever the truth actually lie, this is a pretty interesting little subplot by Bethesda. The fact that no quests at all reference this matriarch character, we just have to find her for ourselves, is something I find really neat. But at the same time, I suppose this is also a very good reason to be very glad that the Forsworn are no longer in complete control of the Reach. And with that, we are going to wrap up our 8th installment of 5 Skyrim theories crazy enough to be true. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. Which of these alternative explanations behind Skyrim's happenings did you find to be the most thought-provoking? And what are your own ideas? Leave a comment down below. As always, like ratings are very much appreciated. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.